When we're first starting in Python, or we just want to play around with some ideas, we can use the Python shell. Sometimes you'll see this called a REPL, R-E-P-L, which stands for Read, Evaluate, Print, Loop. Personally, I don't really like this name. It's weird and just sounds super jargony, so I'm going to just call it the Python shell, and you can too. Fun fact, the term shell is used because it's a specific program on the computer that acts as an outer shell around the inner workings of the computer. Our Python shell acts as a wrapper around the Python language itself, and our system shell is wrapped around all the little programs that make our computer work. The shell lets us write Python code that'll be evaluated or run right away. This makes experimentation really fast. The shell is great, and I use it literally every single day that I write code. But it's very temporary. Code that you write in the shell doesn't get saved anywhere, and there's not really a Python shell history. You don't want to use it to write your actual code. And using the help function isn't cheating at all. It's a great way to get help on those bits that you just don't use often enough to memorize every little detail about. If you look around the video page, you should see a button that says something like Launch Workspace. That button will launch the workspace, which should look kind of like this, that I've made for you for this video. Click it, you'll get a new window. Again, looks a lot like this one. Workspaces are a great tool that we offer here at Treehouse, and it lets me give you code to start with, or it just gives you a clean, repeatable environment to start writing code in. They save you from having to set everything up on your computer if you just want to get moving quickly, or if you want to follow along and not have to recreate everything that I've done on your own. So down here, we have our terminal or our console. If you're on a Mac or a Linux computer, you have a terminal built in, and it actually looks a lot like this, available on your computer. If you're on Windows, you have a command prompt or a terminal, or I think it's called PowerShell. And it won't look exactly the same. It won't look exactly like this, but it's similar. Regardless, no matter what OS you're on, though, you don't actually need your local terminal. We'll just use this one here in Workspaces. We'll talk about how to use your own terminal in a later course or workshop. Click in the window down here, the console, and you can resize this too. So click down here and just type Python. And now you're in the Python shell. So it tells us right here that we're running Python 3.4.1. If at some point you see a different version number there, you see 3.5.0 or something like that, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. So long as it's Python 3 and then 4 or greater, we're good. We're happy. And now we know that we're in the shell because we have the Python up there, and then also because we have these 3 greater than symbols here, these chevrons, angle brackets, whatever you want to call them. You'll probably hear me call them chevrons or greater thans most of the time. So that's what tells us we're in the shell. We know we're in that shell. The first thing that I usually like to know when I get into something is how to get back out of it. So maybe it's a flight or fight syndrome response, I don't know. But once I get in, I want to get out. So how do we get out of the Python shell? So there are a couple of different ways. Often, your prompt will say something like you press Control-D or Control-Z to exit. If your system has whatever that is, that's the thing you want to do. Or we can run the exit or quit commands to leave the shell. Now, I don't usually use the quit command. I'm not sure why. It's just not my habit. So, sticking with my habits, I'm going to type exit with the opening and closing parentheses, and I'm going to press enter, and I'm taken back to my regular shell. See, I had this shell here, and I typed Python to go into the Python shell. And then when I typed exit, I came back out to this shell. So I went into Python, I came right back out. I can, of course, type Python again, and I'll go right back into Python. I type Python, press enter, right back into the shell. So now that we can get in and out of the Python shell, let's play around with it for just a little bit. Just, experiment a little bit. So we can do math in here if we want. We can do 2 plus 2, and we press enter, and Python tells us that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. It's been a long time tradition, a bit of a good luck ritual, if you will, to always have some of your first use of a language to print out the phrase, hello world. Well, we don't have any reason to break with tradition here, so let's see about how we do it. we use the print function, and then inside of these parentheses, we tell it what we want it to print. And print prints out strings most of the time. So we're going to use a quote mark, and then we're going to say hello world, and then we're going to close our quote mark. And when we press return or enter, we get hello world. Now I want you to look at this. You just typed 2 completely valid lines of Python, assuming you're following along with me, and you should be. And you also used a function. This print here is a function. Actually, I guess I mean that you called a function. Got to use that right name. This will be more useful to us once we know some more about Python. To learn more about Python, though, sometimes we need a quick spot of help. Python's shell comes with a really handy built-in tool named, appropriately, help. And help will tell us about the things that we're dealing with. For example, maybe we want to know what all we can do with the print function that we just used. So when we're talking about functions and not using them, we leave off the parentheses. We just use their name. So the name of the function is print. So I'm going to use the help function, and I know it's a function because of these parentheses. And I'm going to ask about the print function. All right, awesome. This tells us that the print function right here prints out a value. So here we've got prints the values to a stream. Don't worry about all these words like here about stream and sys.standardout. Ignore those for now. It prints a value, right? And these ellipses here let us know that it can actually print more than one value. And then finally, there's some other arguments and other control bits that we can set. Those are explained more right down here on the bottom. We're not going to bother with those for most of this course. We may use that end one later, but we're not going to use the rest of them. Feel free to read about them, though, if you want to know a little bit more. So we hit Q in order to get out of this. String belongs to a class, or an object, that's named str. Let's see what Python can tell us about str. So we'll do help, and then str. Press return. There's a lot of stuff here. So here we've got this methods defined here. There's all sorts of stuff down through here. We know they're methods because they have parentheses on them. Yay for consistency. Now we can look up help about a specific method by using the dot syntax. So I pressed Q again to get out of there. And let me show you how to do this dot syntax here. So I know that the str class has a method named center. So I'm going to use dot and then center. Methods, functions, things like that. Again, we don't call them. We don't use parentheses. We just use the name. So if I press enter, then I find out that center centers a string inside of a certain width, and I can give it a fill character if I want. This method of drilling down is really handy when you're just wanting to explore the library or a class or whatever a little bit more. The shell is great, and I use it literally every single day that I write code. But it's very temporary. Code that you write in the shell doesn't get saved anywhere, and there's not really a Python shell history. You don't want to use it to write your actual code. And using the help function isn't cheating at all. It's a great way to get help on those bits that you just don't use often enough to memorize every little detail about.